Hey there, friends. Clark Brown here with CATx. Welcome to our new episode of the Blueprint. In commercial restoration, getting pricing right, it doesn't start with an estimate. It starts with a proper scope. Anyone that's been to my class will hear me say this over and over and over. If your scope is off, leading to profit loss, disputes, and delay payments. People often say, how do I estimate this big job? You scope it first. What does it need done? And then associate that with your price list. The most successful restoration companies in this industry, it's about gathering the right information to build a solid, defensible, profitable estimate that the clients and the insurance companies can't argue with. When I say estimate, I mean a ROM, giving a rough order of magnitude, right? Here's why scoping is the key to pricing and how to do it the right way. Scoping, one way to look at it, scoping is like the blueprint for your estimate. This is showing your work. This is showing, you're going to first explain why you're costing what you cost because your scope comes first. Thinking of scoping as the foundation of the house. It's the slab. The foundation is weak. If it's vague, if the foundation isn't strong, everything else is going to fall apart above it, right? The walls won't hold up, the roof, the electrical, the plumbing, et cetera, et cetera. Your scope has to be really good. You've got to include everything. Might take you a little bit longer. That's why you're going to break this up into phases. Emergency services and mitigation and preparation, environmental, et cetera, like that. But you've got to first develop a scope before you start thinking about the price. Don't think about the price first. A weak scope causes an inaccurate estimate, cost overruns, and eventually disputes from resentment because you did not scope. You missed things because you didn't take the time. A strong scope, alternatively, it's got to justify the pricing. It's going to get you faster approvals, and it's going to have predictable profits based on your budget. You've agreed upon this. They agreed on the scope. The price follows. What does a good scope include? Okay. All affected areas documented. Start out with, where are my boundaries? What are all areas, and document those thoroughly. Not just visible damages. Get into other rooms and look for unseen damages. Figure out if we're talking about the whole building or just a little bit of the building. Then start your moisture mapping if it's water or if it's fire, but start really doing an assessment and start justifying how many people you'll need if it's smoke and mold and odor and whatever. You got to really, really do a good, thorough assessment. Then you got to look at things like specialized equipment needs. Do I need any outside generators or desiccant? Do I need temp power? Do I need something that I don't carry in my truck or my shop? Okay. Then you're going to look at labor and staffing and specialty trades required. What do I need that we employ? Who do we need? What skill sets? And then what outside services? Do I need a big major plumber? Do I need a fire sprinkler company? Do I need an asbestos abatement test? Yes. And then I want you to start looking at things from a compliance standpoint. And that could be OSHA, that could be fire codes, that could be accessibility for ADA, that could be your client's certain compliance if it's ICRA for medical. That's the order that I'd start looking at things. And then you want to look at business interruption factors. Now that you've identified a scope of how you would approach it, look at how that serves their business interruption, their time-sensitive things, so that you can phase out the work to make the most sense. Here's a pro tip. Insurance carriers and consultants will challenge your pricing when the scope is unclear or incomplete. If your scope is rock solid and it's justified and you've attached it to the client's goals, your pricing will be solid and hard to question. They may still question it, but you'll have the confidence to go against it. A poor scope, a limited scope, leads to profit loss. One of the biggest frustrations among commercial restoration contractors and all contractors is getting paid in full and on time. So let's talk about what slows down payments. Missing scope items, vague scope items. Just saying I'm going to dry this structure is not enough. Say I'm going to dry the structure, ceiling, floors, and walls, and building materials in this 12, 15, 18,000 square feet. This tenant space, we're going to put up containment. Be very specific. Adjusters and consultants are challenging your pricing. Guess what? Here's a pro tip. They're not challenging you generally because they know what they're talking about. They just know what works with other contractors on jobs that they're on. Know your scope, stand up for it. And then the constant back and forth. Be very compliant, but be very certain and put it in writing that this is what we're doing. If we're not doing it this way and we're going to do it against the standard, we might have to talk about how, if we move forward at all. Here's how a strong scope truly affects getting paid in full and on time. Believe it or not, commercial adjusters are oftentimes more qualified than residential. They've seen bigger jobs. They're not as scared by the numbers. You get rid of some of their disputes when they see that you've got documentation. They're waiting to see if you are good or not good. Are you solid or not solid? Do you have a good scope? Are you certain? You're not providing as many change orders because everything was really captured up front. They're going to come up, but make sure they're really, really small. But the fewer change orders, the fewer changes, the more confidence, and it speeds everything up. And then I would tell you, a good scope allows you to be justified in asking for a deposit for the job. I like 20 to 30%, and then setting up structured payments based on your terms. A strong scope, point blank, means you spend less time arguing over getting paid and more time actually getting paid because the scope dictates it. You don't have to argue. The less you argue and just hold your ground, the more they'll just say, okay. Scoping is a skill. It's not something you're born with. There's no class for it really. Just master it and you'll win. The best restoration consultants or the best restoration project managers and directors that I've ever worked with, they don't just guess at the price. Now, you might have a square foot price in your head, but you've got to look at the other things because those assumptions get you in trouble. The best of the best, they master the art of scoping. They walk into a job, they have confidence, and that builds trust immediately with the client. Here's how you can improve your scoping processes, okay? Use checklists. Create some checklists on scoping so that you can capture everything that might be there. If it's not there, it's a quick no. Create some process for that. Train your project managers, your project directors, your estimators, whoever goes out there. You got to spend time on training them with role playing, old jobs that worked out well, jobs that turned out great. What did we do well? And then they've got to learn a little bit about how policies and adjusters and things like that work. They don't need to know just Xactimate and just T&M. And then leverage advanced documentation tools to increase your documentation. That might be 3D scanning. That's your Matterport, your DocuSketch, infrared images, cameras, things like that. So any kind of meters that you might have for that, really just, again, the more concrete you can be with your data, the better. You might consider on some jobs bringing in consultants, bringing in a public adjuster, bringing in third parties that deal with complex claims all the time. It's okay that you're going to eventually come up to a job bigger than what you know how to run. I've done it. Everyone has. It happens. Bring in somebody to make sure that you, number one, maximize the opportunity. Number two, look for the angles and avoid red flags. Avoid getting held out for a year. I've been out as a consultant when I'd find out who the primary client was, like an insurance or a property management company, and I would tell the client that hired me, they have a track record of not paying their bills. And I know a lot of the big players, and I'm like, so-and-so, everybody in the industry has eventually worked for them and fired them as a client because they don't pay their bills. So let's see how this goes, but you need to really ask for a deposit and see if they're willing to sign your contract and terms. And even then, what happens when they don't pay you for a year or at all? So sometimes that's what having an expert means, is telling you what you don't know. We all need that. If you're struggling with getting commercial work, or if you're doing it, if the profit margins aren't where you think you need to be, if your billing styles aren't great, payments are slow, you're finding yourself arguing with adjusters and not having all of the defensible answers, look at your scoping process. And those are probably some areas to prove that up. A weak scope leads to price cuts, delays, and lost profits and revenue and opportunity, and a loss of trust from your customer. If you can master scoping on the front end, so many of the other things that happen later become real easy to win and dominate. So I'd like you to take away scoping is first on jobs and not pricing. Here at CATx, that's what we do. We help restoration contractors perfect their scoping issues, improve their pricing strategies, and get paid in full and faster. You want to increase your commercial footprint, profitability? Reach out to us today at CATx, see how we can work together and help you with your team. Check out what our programs look like, any upcoming events that we have. We have a few across the country a couple times a year. See which one's next. If you're out there right now trying to build your commercial division, don't delay, because you're handing jobs over to your competition right now. Let's stop that. See you on the next Blueprint.